Welcome to the online tutorial for my 2023 Pinners class. Let's pipe, y'all.
All right, guys, let's take a look at our Let's Pipe Y'all DIY cookie kit. Let's open it right on up, and here we have our practice sheet. Now, this class is all about learning how to pipe, and so we are going to be doing a majority of the class right here on this practice sheet.
I put the practice sheet down into a page protector. That way you can wipe it off and try again as many times as you want to.
Okay, on the back you have a reference guide here and some other information. Inside the box you should have 3 colors of icing, a brown outline consistency, a green outline consistency, and an orange hybrid consistency icing. You should have 2 pumpkin cookies that are not flooded. You should have a pre-flooded pink Texas cookie. You should have a mini edible marker. You should have a toothpick and a pair of scissors. Now, these scissors are really cool. All you do is open them up and push them together, and there you have your scissors. And then when you're done, you can just push them back together. You also have a piece of paper towel and your class placemat. So let's go ahead and get that out. All right, I'm gonna move the placemat and the paper towel over to the side. And I'm gonna come here to my practice sheet. This is what I'm gonna be starting on first. I'm gonna clear a little bit of space for myself. Now let's go to our icing bags. Let's open it up. We're gonna be using our brown icing for our practice sheet. You should have a little bit of green. You could also use that, but I would suggest using the brown. We're not gonna need much of it on our cookies, so I gave you more of it for the practice sheet. The first thing that we need to do though is we need to massage our icing bags back together. So when the icing was sitting and resting, the water separated away from the icing. So we just want to squeeze the bag and massage the bag to bring that icing back together. And what you're looking for is that the brown color or whichever color is all the same. There's not any kind of splotchiness, especially down here towards the middle and the end. As you work, this top part is going to kind of smooth out and blend back together. So I'm really worried about the middle and the bottom here. All right, let's talk about how to hold a piping bag. Before we do anything, it's very important that we know how to hold the piping bag properly. So I am right-handed, so I'm gonna be using my right hand pipe width. And the way that I hold the piping bag is I put my hand flat and I put the back of the bag in between my thumb and my pointer finger. Then I just squeeze and make a fist around the bag. Now, as the icing comes out, I'm gonna twist the top and again, just hold it between my thumb and pointer finger there. And I want the pressure from the back of the bag to go towards the tip. If I was to hold it right here in the center, the icing's gonna shoot out the top and shoot out the bottom. So you don't wanna do this. You wanna hold it from the top and have it come out towards the end. Now, when I'm piping, sometimes I might have to reposition my hand, but most of the time it is always between my thumb and my pointer finger. Now, I usually take my left hand and I will either use 1 finger or 2 to help guide my piping bag as I'm piping.
Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started. So grab those practice sheets.
All right, we're gonna start right here with our line. So I'm gonna turn my page horizontally. And I like to pull the icing towards me. I think it's easier to go this way than it is to go this way. Before we get started, let's go ahead and cut a small hole in our icing. So it's always easier to get bigger. It's way harder to go smaller. You can't get smaller. So I would suggest starting with a small hole and then getting bigger if you need to. And the way you know if you need to get bigger is if you're having a lot of trouble getting the icing out of the bag, you're having to squeeze a lot, and it's really hard to do, then you know that you might need a little bit of a bigger hole. So start small and then get bigger. Okay, that looks good to me. So like I said before, I'm gonna start with the line, and I'm actually gonna turn this over because I wanna work right to left, or left to right, excuse me. So I'm gonna start over here first. When I am piping, what I am trying to do is lift my icing up like I am lifting up a string. So I'm gonna anchor down, which means I'm gonna squeeze a little bit of icing. I'm gonna squeeze, applying even pressure, and I'm gonna pull up like I am pulling a string. And it's gonna actually be above my paper for a while. So I'm gonna anchor down. And then, like I said, I'm pulling up like a string. I'm not dragging the tip of my piping bag on the paper at all. And then when I get to the end of the line, I'm gonna bring it down and anchor it to the end of the line. Let's do that again. I'm gonna anchor down, squeeze a little bit, apply even pressure, lift up like a string. I'm moving nice and slow. If your string is breaking, you're either not applying enough pressure or you're moving too fast. If I were to drag my piping bag, I'm not gonna get this nice puffy line. One of the things that you really want when you're decorating royal icing cookies is you want a nice big puffy line. It's actually a lot harder to drag your icing on the paper. Your line is gonna be thin, it's not gonna be nice and smooth, and it's definitely not gonna be straight. So see the difference between those two? Now, once you've got the hang of it, let's move on to this longer line. I'm applying even pressure just like I did before, but now I'm going a little bit further. Anchor down, lift up like I am lifting a string, and anchor down again. Let's do this last line. The key to a big long line like this is to move nice and slow and apply even pressure. Now for my squiggly line, this is another reason why it's really important to lift up like a string and not drag your piping bag, because what you're going to be able to do is place that icing into whatever shape you want. It makes a smoother shape and it's easier, trust me. So just like you did with the lines, you're gonna anchor down, you're gonna lift up like a string, and you're just gonna guide that icing into the squiggle shape. I'm moving nice and slow, I'm applying even pressure, and I'm just slowly laying down that icing as I move down the page. Now for our zigzag line, we're going to do, it's just a combination of little lines, but we never pull our piping bag completely off. So we start by anchoring down, lifting up like a string, anchor down at the point, and then apply pressure again, lift up like a string, anchor down. Pressure, 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 anchor down. I'm never lifting my piping bag away. It's staying connected the whole time. But I'm just doing the same combination of anchor down, lift up like a string, anchor down, lift up like a string. the whole way down. Now, my wrist was at a weird angle, so I had to stop to reposition my wrist. So I'm just going to come back down to that point, anchor again, lift up like a string, and continue on. All right, now let's move over to our shapes. Now these shapes are gonna help us when it comes to outlining our cookie and even when we get down here to the writing. We're just going to practice having even more control over our icing. So let's start with the hardest shape first, in my opinion, and that is the circle. The circle is always hard, just because circles are never perfect. So I'm gonna start up here at the top. I'm gonna anchor down, and I'm gonna lift up like a string. And just like I did on that wavy line, I'm moving nice and slow, and I'm just lightly or gently placing that string as I move. And that is an air bubble. So when you have an air bubble, it just shoots out like that, okay? So I can just take my scribe tool and I can scrape that off, or my toothpick. Or I could take a paper towel and just erase the entire thing and start over. I'm just gonna scrape off that one section. And now, just like I did when I had to stop on my zigzag, I'm gonna do the same thing here. I'm gonna just anchor down, attaching the string, and then lift back up and complete my circle. Now for the heart, I'm going to anchor down at the bottom point. I'm gonna do one side at a time. I'm gonna anchor down at the bottom point, lift up like a string, and move this icing around till I get to the point. So as I'm working, the top of my bag is emptying out. So I'm just twisting it to keep the bag nice and tight. If you don't twist, it's actually gonna make it harder for you to squeeze. So make sure you are twisting as you're moving and keeping your bag nice and tight. All right, let's finish this heart. I'm gonna start by anchoring down, lifting up like a string, just like I did on the other side. I'm gonna bring it back down to that point. Now let's do our square, which is just like our zigzag line, but we're making a shape now. So we're anchoring down, we're lifting up like a string, we're anchoring down at the point, lifting up like a string, anchoring down at the point, lifting up like a string, anchoring down at the point, lifting up like a string, and anchoring down to complete our square. Now the last one is our swirl, and this one is really fun. I'm gonna start from the outside and work my way in. You can go the opposite way if you want to, but just like with the squiggle line, I'm gonna anchor down, I'm gonna lift up like a string, and I'm just going to lightly and slowly place this icing as I work my way in towards the center of the swirl. Applying even pressure and moving nice and slow. All right, now that we've got our lines down, let's move on down to some different techniques. We're actually gonna start on this side first with the dots. So when you're doing a dot, you're going to squeeze your piping bag and then release pressure completely and lift up. Squeeze, 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 release pressure completely and lift up. Let's do a bigger circle now. You might have to wiggle your piping bag kind of in a circular motion. Release pressure and lift up. I'm gonna squeeze, and my piping bag is not actually touching the paper, it's just right above it, and then I'm gonna lift up. Okay, that's how we do our dots. Now, let's do our teardrop shape. This teardrop shape is super important because it's gonna help us do all these different techniques. So, to do a teardrop shape, I'm gonna angle my bag, And I'm gonna start squeezing right here at the top and create a dot. And then when I'm done, I'm gonna release pressure and I'm gonna drag. Squeeze, 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 release pressure and drag. For the bigger ones, I might have to do some circular motions and release and drag. Squeeze, 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 release and drag. Same thing here. Squeeze, circle, 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 release and drag. Okay, and that's how we do our teardrop shape. Now let's take these teardrop shapes and let's make some hearts. And all a heart is 2 teardrop shapes together. So I'm just going to squeeze and drag towards the point, and then come to the other side and squeeze and drag towards the point. Repeat that, squeeze and drag towards the point, squeeze and drag towards the point. Let's do some bigger ones here. Wiggle, 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 and drag towards the point. Wiggle, 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 and drag towards the point. Wiggle, 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 drag towards the point. Wiggle, 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 drag towards the point. And for the largest ones, again, wiggle, 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 drag towards the point. Wiggle, 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 and drag towards the point. And last one, wiggle, 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 drag towards the point. Swirl, 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 and drag towards the point. Now these down here are actually flowers. And these are really, really fun to do. So we're gonna start by just filling in this circle. I'm just swirling my icing around, making a big dot of icing. So I'm squeezing and just swirling the icing around as I go. Squeeze, 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 and swirl, swirl, swirl. Okay, let's finish filling these up. Squeeze. Make a nice big dot. All right, and for the big ones, I'm just kind of doing a spiral motion, just squeezing, applying a lot of pressure, and filling up the entire area. All right, and now here's how we turn this dot into a flower. I'm gonna start on the outside. I'm gonna anchor down to the outside, lift up like a string. I'm gonna spiral my icing in. Boop, I've got a little flower. So anchoring down to the edge and then spiraling it in to make a little flower. Okay, now let's turn our page so that these are facing me. Now we learned our teardrop shape over here, and now we're gonna put that teardrop shape and the heart shape to good use. We're gonna make some cable knit patterns. We are gonna be doing this on one of our pumpkins, so we're gonna practice here. And I'm actually gonna cut a little bit more of a hole in my piping bag. Not a lot, but just a little bit. Make that a little larger. Okay, so now we're gonna just start by making a connecting teardrop line. So I'm going to squeeze and drag, and then come right next to it and squeeze and drag. And so I'm kind of stacking the teardrops on top of each other. This is a really, really easy and very popular technique. It was one of the first ones that I ever learned. It looks great around the edge of a cookie, and you can use it for sweater patterns as well. Okay, so now let's do our cable knit. This is gonna be our sweater pattern or cable knit pattern. And all it is a bunch of stacked hearts. So I'm gonna squeeze and drag towards the point, squeeze, drag towards the point. Then I'm gonna go right next to it, squeeze and drag and squeeze and drag. And just continue on making this cable knit pattern. Squeeze and drag and squeeze and drag. Now, if you think you need some more practice, you can go over to this one, but I'm gonna go ahead and just move right on along. Okay, we're gonna go to some lettering. We're gonna start with our basic hey, and all it is a combination of lines. So we're going to anchor down to the top, lift up like a string, and anchor back down. Same thing over here, anchor down, lift up like a string, and anchor down. Now I'm gonna just anchor to the line and anchor to the other line. Okay, let's make our E. Like I said, it's just a combination of lines. So a line down the back, line from the side. There we go. Now let's do this line, anchor down, lift up like a string, lift up like a string, perfect. Now here's the fun part. We're gonna try to recreate this right here in this space. So if I'm looking in reference, the letters in reference to my lines, I know that my H starts at the top line and goes straight down all the way to the bottom. I move over just a little bit and I'm gonna do the same thing. And then the center of the H just goes right over that dotted line. Just like that. I'm gonna move over again and I'm gonna start with a line from top to bottom. And then 3 small lines, 1, 2, 3, and there's my E. Now the Y starts over at the side, it angles down and stops at the dotted line. And then it comes back from the center down to the bottom line. And now I'm just gonna go over a little bit, start at the top line and connect right there at the middle. Okay, now let's move over here to this lowercase hello. And this one is a little bit more difficult because we've got some curves. So we're gonna start with a line first for our H. And then we're gonna anchor to the line, lift up like a string, and wrap it around to the bottom. Now for the E, I'm gonna start by making my center line here. And then I'm going to anchor to the center line, lift up like a string, and just loop that icing around for my E. Now the L's are fun because they're just pretty much a straight line with a little bitty loop right at the bottom. A little bitty turn starting at the top, coming down with a little bitty turn, and then we've got one of those dreaded circles right there. All right, and again, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm just going to be referencing this line. I see that the top of the H starts between the top and the dotted line. So I'm gonna start right there in the middle and make one big long line. Starting at the dotted line, I'm gonna start curving around, making my first bump for the H. Remember, I made a line for the E first, and it's a little bit above halfway between the bottom line and the center line, so it's right about there. And then I just anchor to that line and loop it around. Now my L's start about in the middle between the top and the dotted, and they're just a straight line with a little curve, straight line with a little curve. And then the O starts at the dotted line, comes right around, comes back up to the dotted line. Okay, and now we get to some cursive, which is really nice and fun. This is how you know you've mastered piping, if you can do this. So we're gonna start right here, and we're gonna lift up like a string, and we're gonna loop this H around to the bottom. Okay, so we've just made a big loopy line. Now, I'm gonna anchor to the bottom. I'm gonna make a little hump and come to the O. Now this icing's a little bit big and these letters are a little small, but I'm still doing the technique where I lift up like a string and guide my icing. And I'm just working letter by letter in little sections. Now for the D, it's a circle right here. And then I'm gonna actually start where it connects to the Y, and I'm gonna bring it up and back down. And then here we have our Y, lifting up like a string and placing it down. Howdy. Let's do our Y here, and then our A. Lift up like a string for the L, loop it right around. You can keep going or you can stop. Loop it right around. There you go. Now that one is a little bit small for the size hole that I have, so I'm gonna spread it out a little bit when I repipe it. So I'm just going to reference this as I go, starting at the center line, looping around, come up and down. Let's make our O, make a W, start with our D here. Oops. And we are gonna loop around, back together, our Y, and then our y'all. Ys are fun because you can really lift up and bring those around. L and L. All right, now we are ready to start our cookies. We've kind of got the hang of how piping goes, and now we're ready for some cookies. So let's move this over to the side and let's grab our cookies. I'm just going to cut the bags. And set out each one of my cookies. All right, we've got our cookies here and we are ready to decorate. So let's get to it. First things first, we need to bring our icing back together, especially the orange, because the orange is a or a hybrid consistency, so it has more water in it. So it's gonna be very important that you squeeze this bag together and bring it together. Really, really important that you squeeze that icing together. Okay, let's do the same thing for the green. The green is not near as bad. It is the same consistency as the brown, which is an outline consistency. But let's just massage it back together just in case. All right. We're gonna be working in sections here, so I'm not worried about the Texas right now. I'm gonna move that to the side. And I'm gonna be working back and forth between my two pumpkins. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a little stem using my brown. And I'm gonna do this to both pumpkins. So I'm gonna turn my pumpkin to the side here. And I'm gonna anchor down, lift up like a string, anchor down, lift up like a string, and just create a little zigzag line right here at the top of each pumpkin. One. Doesn't have to be perfect because it's a stem. And there we have it. Our beautiful pumpkin stem, and we are done with our brown. It can go away. All right, one of these is gonna be cable knit, and one of these is just gonna be a nice big puffy orange pumpkin. We wanna start with our big puffy pumpkin first, our orange one, because we need it to have time to dry in between each section. So I'm gonna take my orange and I'm gonna start with the small hole again. Okay, this is a hybrid consistency icing, which means that it is got more water in it than the outline does. I'm gonna start by outlining my cookie. So I squeezed out a little icing here just to make sure that it's not gonna just shoot out of the bag. If you wipe the front side of this clean using a paper towel or a wet rag, and turn it over, you see that you've got your reference guide here for all 3 of your cookies. If we're looking at our orange cookie, you can see that it has 3 different sections. And we want each section to be nice and puffy. So we're gonna outline first and then fill it in. So there are 2 ways to do this. You can just go for it, or you can take your black edible marker and you can trace this center part of the pumpkin using that black edible marker, just to give yourself a little bit of a guide. You don't have to do that, but it is helpful if you're a little bit nervous. Now I'm gonna take my orange here and I'm gonna anchor down and lift up like a string. Now this is gonna come out really fast because it's not as thick. So be very careful. You don't have to apply hardly any pressure at all. You just have to move your bag. I'm gonna create the center part of my pumpkin first, and I'm just gonna anchor to that line, lift up like a string, and outline the outer part of my pumpkin, and anchor to the line. Anchor to the line, lift up like a string, bring it on around, and anchor to my pumpkin. Now I'm gonna let that sit for just a little bit because I want that to dry. And I'm gonna come over here to my second pumpkin, and this one I'm gonna be doing in green. You could also do it in brown if you wanted it to look like a woven pumpkin. But I'm gonna cut a hole, remember small first and then get a little larger. And I'm gonna outline the sections of my pumpkin just like I did with the orange one, but this time using this green. And I'm not gonna draw it on, but remember you can draw it on if you want to. So I'm starting with a big circle right here in the middle, or big oval. And I'm gonna come on to the stem here. And then I'm just going to outline each side. There we go. Now I'm gonna move this one over and I'm gonna bring my orange pumpkin towards me. All right, so we're here at our orange cookie, our orange pumpkin, and we're gonna start by filling in the outer 2 edges. So you can actually cut a little bit of a larger hole. You don't want it too big, but you can do a little bit of a larger hole just because you're going to be filling in instead of outlining. So when I am filling in, I'm gonna start not right on the edge of the cookie on that line, but a little bit towards the inside, and I don't have to apply a lot of pressure to fill it in, but I am moving not directly on top of the line, but kind of inside a little bit. I'm just gonna squeeze and fill that all in. Now when I'm done, this is a thinner bit of icing, so to keep it from spilling out everywhere, I'm just going to pinch the end and twist it and push it back in on itself, and then that way it's not gonna spill everywhere. So now I'm gonna take my toothpick and I'm just gonna wiggle my toothpick around right on top of this icing. I'm not touching the cookie, I'm just wiggling the icing on the surface. And it should smooth out. If you're having trouble smoothing it out, you can take your toothpick, touch the cookie, and wiggle it back and forth. And that'll help that icing settle in a little bit more. All right, let's do the other side. Same thing, just on the other side of our pumpkin. Wiggling around just on the surface. All right, now I'm gonna move that cookie to the side, and I'm gonna go to my green cable knit pumpkin here. So I'm gonna take my green outline consistency icing, and I'm going to be doing the crisscross cable knit motion that we did on our practice sheet, this one right here. I'm gonna start with the center circle. So I'm working in each section of the cookie. So I'm gonna start at the very top, and I'm gonna squeeze and drag and squeeze and drag. So I've made a heart right in the center. Now I'm gonna make another heart right underneath it, squeeze and drag and squeeze and drag. And I'm just going to continue making little hearts all the way down the center of my pumpkin. Okay, now I'm going to do each side of my pumpkin, and I'm gonna follow the outer curve right here. So I'm gonna start with one little dot, and then I'm gonna start making hearts. So squeeze and drag and squeeze and drag. And I'm just following the curve of my center line. Let's do the same thing on the other side. All right, now I'm actually gonna take this pumpkin and I'm gonna flip it over. Turn it upside down. And I'm gonna do the same thing, but now my lines are gonna be going, or my pattern is gonna be going in the opposite direction. I'm actually gonna start from the left and go to the right. It's just easier for me to do it that way. And if you're not filling this up, so I've cut a pretty big hole in this and I'm squeezing quite a bit. So my pattern is nice and big, and if you need it to be bigger, apply more pressure. But if you haven't filled up your pumpkin, you can add more cable knit lines. Okay, same thing on this side. Kind of skipped around. I'm just gonna go left to right, and now I'm getting all skippy. All right, let's do the center, and then we're done with this cookie. I'm doing one little teardrop down at the bottom, and then as I come out towards this larger, wider part, I'm just applying more pressure to make my teardrops a little bigger. One teardrop at the top, and then just do my hearts. All right, and there we have our cable knit pumpkin. And it's done. So let's move back to our orange pumpkin, which we have right here. And we're just gonna fill in that last little section. And I'm just smoothing this icing out right on the surface, and I'm kind of going in a swirly motion for this larger section. Then I'm going to take my scribe tool and push it through the icing all the way to the cookie. to get those little mountains out, I'm just gonna clean my toothpick off completely, and then I can just lightly press those down into the icing. Okay, I'm gonna move that to the side and let it finish drying. And I'm gonna come over here to my Texas. Now, if you turn to the back side of your Texas, you can see, or of your practice sheet, you can see our little template for what our cookie is going to look like. We're gonna be doing some words. Now, I'm gonna be using my edible marker for happy and fall. And then I'm also going to use it to outline where I want the word y'all to be. So I'm just going to leave the cookie right next to it as I work so I can kind of reference it. If you're feeling uncomfortable, you can even take this marker and write directly onto the practice sheet. Now, nothing's really gonna stick to it because it's an edible marker, but you can always practice it with the edible marker first. So I'm just going to reference, and I'm gonna start with happy, which is line, line, with a little line in the middle. H, A, P, P, Y. Okay, and then I can see that the F starts right under the P, and it's F, A, L, L. Now you could add some little lines or little dots or darken it. You can do lots of different things using that edible marker. You keep the lid on it, it should last for a long time. Now this is a pre-flooded cookie because you need your icing to be completely dry before you use the marker, otherwise it'll just go straight through. Okay, now you can either freehand this or you can map it out. So I'm gonna map it out, and I'm just going to fill in all the space, and I'm just gonna lightly do little strokes. I'm not gonna press down super hard. I'm just gonna map out where my y'all, Y, A, Now remember, you do not have to do this. If you feel confident doing it without it, you can totally just go for it. Stick the lid back on my pen. And now I'm just going to use my green icing to just trace the y'all of this cookie. So I'm gonna anchor down, lift up like a string, and I'm just going to guide this icing over my lines. And now you can take your little marker, you can add some dots, you can add some ticking around the side if you want to. So you can just make little lines right around the edge of your Texas. Whatever you want to do, you can draw on your Texas, add some flowers, add some brown flowers, add some green flowers here and there. Just gonna turn the cookie as I work. There we go. All right, and one more thing. I'm just gonna add a little tiny detail here to my orange pumpkin using my green. I'm just gonna put a little heart there. You don't have to do that. It's just cute. So there are our 3 cookies.
If you have any questions about this tutorial, please feel free to send me an email at busybeebakehouse@gmail.com or send me a message on Instagram at busybee.bakehouse. And until next time, happy cookieing.